It's a new year, and for many creator-focused businesses and just businesses in general, they're all gearing up and executing plans for 2023. Including myself, I've made some personal resolutions and business resolutions for this podcast and my business. My goal has always been to reach more people. So my plans will continue to increase my reach for the audio podcast and introduce more content for other digital platforms such as YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. So my word for 2023 is execute. So it's time to create. That's what we're going to talk about in this episode of what used to be known as the Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast and now known as the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast, what used to be known as the Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about plans for 2023 for this podcast and Speak Up for Blue in general. The goal for this year in 2023 is execute. I derived and came up and identified things that I wanted to do in the future. Last year in 2022, I didn't have a chance, mostly due to procrastination, trying to figure out how to increase my reach, not only for this audio podcast, but also for sort of just the general, purpose of reaching more people on the web, essentially, just to make sure that more people have access to information from me through marine conservation related material. And so I made a lot of plans last year, and I said, I want to do this. So being a new year and being the fact that I'm a person who likes to do resolutions, who likes to try and do things, the big thing that I want to do is get off the planning and research phase and just get on the execute phase. And so the execute phase may not be perfect, but the goal is to just create, right? Just to execute that part of create. Keep away the planning, keep away the fears. Like, I've pretty much gone over everything. I know kind of what I want to say. I've got the equipment for the most part. And so in January, I will be launching a couple of other things. And so hopefully that will kind of continue to grow, working into my workflow, kind of probably like, fumbling around a little bit and trying to figure out a good workflow. But that's my goal for this year. So in today's episode, I want to talk about the changes to this podcast. That's not going to be a big changes in terms of the overall content and frequency, but it will be some changes just to kind of maximize things. And I'll talk a little bit about what I've done in the past year to make some changes, and so what I want to do this year. The other thing I'm going to be talking about, some new content that I'm going to try and come up with this year, that I will be coming up with, them executing. And then, of course, I'm going to be talking about doing a video podcast on YouTube, and then also using other platforms to create content to get that information out there. And I think last year in 2022, I had to really focus my thoughts on what am I doing here? What am I really doing to try, to spend more time dedicating myself to not only the podcast, but just to content creation. That was the major focus over the past 2, maybe 3 years. I guess 2 years, full years. I've been really focusing on building a client-driven business through podcasting that I kind of fell into. Part of that was, just clients coming to me, people coming to me and saying, hey, can you edit this podcast? Can you get this podcast going? That had to do with marine conservation, Beyond Jaws, talking with my good friend and colleague, Dr. David Ebert. We came up with a concept for a shark podcast, and anything or everything but the major sharks that are talked about lost sharks and all this kind of stuff. And then I've just released, and I'll have him on the podcast soon. I'm producing a podcast called Plan C. That's all about the blue carbon movement and carbon sequestration in the ocean. And so that's going to be a really interesting podcast for all of you. And I'll have Dr. Will Burns, who is the host of that, or the co-host now. And so we've just released the first episode, and so we're releasing more in the future every 2 weeks. So that will be fun as well. Now, those are some of the science-related podcasts that I had. And over the last couple of years, I had the Toronto Zoo podcast, which is ending, and then a number of other podcasts that are out of the sort of wildlife and marine related field. It was naturopath and things like that. And that was a business that got me through the pandemic, kept me very, very busy. But that's kind of winding down a little bit. Some of the projects have ended. Some clients decided to have their own team come in, and I've gone back and forth on whether I wanted more clients because it takes me away from putting time into this podcast. And so what I'm going to be doing in 2023 and what I've been thinking about over 2022 is how do I move forward with this podcast where I can spend more time on the content, more time talking about the ocean, but also kind of keeping that monetization, the money that came in from the client services. So I will be taking on more clients that will want me to do their editing and so forth. I have a team of editors and stuff that will help me through that. But also I'm going to be probably charging a little bit more, get less clients, but more work, and be able to do it that way, which I think is much better for me because I do get to spend more time on this podcast as well as the content that I want to be talking about, which is marine conservation related content. And so for this podcast, you've seen it, you've heard it, I've changed the name. I've changed the name to How to Protect the Ocean. The reason I did that was more for clarity of the podcast. I always found, although Speak Up for Blue, which is the original name of this podcast, was always a name that I enjoyed, it wasn't a name that really kind of told the story of what this podcast is all about. I moved it to Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast because of SEO reasons. People, when you searched up ocean within a browser for Apple Podcasts, this podcast wasn't showing up. And so I wanted to show up more. So I put the word ocean in there. And I still found over the time that, and I've worked with other clients and stuff where we've changed the name. And there has been a slight increase in the number of listeners that have come in. So I decided this year I'm going to change the name as an experiment. Of course, we're scientists, we do experiments. And so what I wanted to do is, this is the whole idea of this podcast is teach you how to protect the ocean by knowing what's going on in the ocean, speaking up for the ocean, and then, living for a better ocean by taking action. So it still follows the same principles, just the name's different. It's a little bit more niche down. It's a little bit more of a driven name to say, hey, do you want to know how to protect the ocean? This is how you protect the ocean. And so with that said, I want to be a little bit more focused on conservation and how to protect the ocean, how we protect the ocean from policies, how you can affect the ocean or protect the ocean through looking at policy yourself, but also individual choices and community choices and volunteering choices and working with organizations and how to pick out those organizations. So I've talked about that before, but I'm going to be a little bit more focused on that. And part of that will be I'll be interviewing more sustainability companies. When I interviewed Aidan Vogel back in December about his project where he was talking about making sustainable homes in every aspect, or net negative homes in every aspect, that was a really important podcast to me, to be able to interview someone like Aidan, who's not a marine biologist, not really in the marine conservation realm, has a history of it because his dad is in it, but it's very important to him as an entrepreneur to solve that solution, that to be able to provide that solution. And that moved me to be like, hey, I need to get more people on here that are searching for those solutions and are trying to attempt to do those solutions through businesses, through companies that maybe we can take advantage of by supporting, by buying their products or buying their services. And so what I wanted to do is bring them on and interview the people, whether they be startups, whether they be people who have been on the podcast before, whether they've been in business for a long time. I want to reintroduce that concept to you so that you can get comfortable with the companies that are coming around. Because the one thing that I've struggled with is, are companies really sustainable? Are they really eco-friendly, or are they just trying to greenwash? And I think being able to speak and hear from the people who have started the companies or the people who are working for those companies will allow us to make a better judgment and feel connected to those companies, so that when we do decide, if we do decide to buy products from them, it's really important to be able to hear from them and get to know them and connect with them. So I think that's a really important aspect. There's also going to be more discussions on what to buy. What are the good products? I've been struggling a lot with buying new clothes and trying to find out what is the best product to go with that's not going to be like crazy expensive for me to buy a pair of pants, or everything's up right now just because of inflation. But also, when you tend to buy clothing that is more sustainable and more eco-friendly, it's a little bit more expensive for a number of reasons. But it's something that I wanted to discuss more about and find out what the best places to buy through my own experimentation. I'll be sharing that, but also by having companies on that deal with that. So that's going to be an important one. And then I'm going to come up with something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and I don't know how many times I'll be able to put those out. I'm shooting for 6 episodes this year, and those episodes are going to be sort of a multi-interview podcast on a specific issue. So I have a couple of issues that I would like to explore, and those issues, I'm not going to say right now, one's local, the other ones are more global, but the issue is more to the issues are more to like dive in on, get multiple aspects from people to find out what is, and give you the decision of what's the truth. So basically be able to navigate an issue. So even just think of an example. I don't know if I'm going to do this or not, but just seafood choices. What is the best seafood choice to make? How do they make those decisions? And how do we make those decisions as consumers to say, yes, this is the best seafood choice, right? If we want to decide, if we're eating seafood and if we want to decide to eat seafood, right? Other aspects, buying clothing. Other aspects are like local, a local issue that's happening. I'm looking to get experts in and to kind of look at the story of the policy and how we can navigate through that, if there's anything that we can do and what people are doing. So I think by doing these episodes, maybe once every other month, so 6 episodes total, to be able to bring that to you and bring those specific issues to you, I think will be important. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this, but I'm thinking of I'll probably release the individual interviews maybe on a Patreon or something. I want to kind of journal it as video journal it as I go along. I don't know if I'm going to do that on the YouTube channel, which I'll talk about in just a moment, or if I'm going to do that through like a Patreon or something like that and get people to do be the executive producer or be a producer on the, for the podcast, for the content driven, and then be able to support us on Patreon. And then I'll be able to share my experiences through there and maybe get some feedback from you as well. So I would really like to know that. So if you're interested in being a Patreon member as a producer, and we can meet once a month to discuss these episodes, help me think it out, help me, drive some different issues, or ask some specific questions, or even talk about who to talk to. I think that would be really helpful, and I think it would be really beneficial to not only you but to me as well. So if you're interested in that, please DM me on Instagram at SpeakUpForBlue. I'd love to hear from you and discuss that more. Okay, so that's sort of what I have planned for the audio podcast: changing the name, interviews with more sustainable companies, and also discuss what to buy. That's a better choice, and kind of go through my experimentation in doing that. And then doing multi-interview podcast episodes on a specific issue. So more like a highly produced kind of podcast episode. See where those go. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about was the introduction to the video podcast. Now, I've thought about this quite a bit. And there is something that I'd like to get back into through the video podcast, which will be essentially me talking into a microphone, but into a camera with lights and a bit of a set that I have here in my office. And, doing some getting back into the ocean news part and bringing you ocean news, but also reactions to videos that I see online. I've been wanting to do that for a while, and just bringing you marine conservation related information. And I think that's something that, with the way I've structured the podcast through feedback and through, going through it for the last 7.5 years, the audio podcast, I've gotten away from just providing ocean news. And so I think there's a really good opportunity to build a reputation on YouTube as a video podcaster, to bring you sort of everything related to the ocean that's more focused on, news, reactions, things like that. Make it some fun stuff, probably bring some people on every once in a while, to come up with different shows and stuff. But just to kind of, building up that reach through a video podcasting platform like YouTube. YouTube is investing in video podcasting platform, and so that's going to be important. The one thing I should mention, just to go back, the audio podcast, one thing I did in 2022 is I paid for advertising on other podcast apps. So I went to Overcast, Podcast Addict, and I paid a couple $100 every month to increase my reach on there. I found it okay. It wasn't the best. It did increase sort of my subscriber numbers, but it doesn't provide like how long those subscribers are with me and if they stay on me and stay with me or not and stay subscribed or followed to the podcast. But it gives you an idea of, I can sort of look at my numbers for the month, for that month that I put an ad up on those podcast apps and see how many subscribers I got in those podcast apps. So I'll probably continue to do that here and there. But the major thing that I'm trying to do is change the name of the audio podcast, see if I can get some people through that. But also I'm going to be, going on YouTube. And I'm going to be doing video podcasts for YouTube. YouTube is a huge, huge audience. It's a huge, huge audience. There's so many videos that are consumed on there, and there are marine biologists who are doing some work, just not the way that I do it. And so I think there's room for me, as I think there's room for a lot of other people to do it. And I have the will and the means to do it. And so that's sort of my goal, is to put out more content on there. And again, the purpose of the video podcast is to kind of give the same idea. It's going to be a bit of a raw video, very loosely edited, maybe adding some pictures here and there based on the article, but also just kind of me talking into a camera as well as my microphone and being able to do this. And it's something I've always wanted to do. I started off doing YouTube when I first started doing this, but even before the podcast was launched, I just didn't have the time to keep going. And I think the way I'm going to do it now, it's going to be raw, it's going to be fun, it's going to be exciting for me to do it. And as well, YouTube is exploring a lot of different things. They're exploring sort of the SEO part. They're exploring bringing content to people who want specific content on specific topics. And like I said, I think there's room for more marine conservation topics out there, especially sort of, topic like new topics or popular topics, and so being able to take advantage of that and being able to discuss that will be a lot easier. I'll be experimenting a little bit with that, but I'll also be, there trying to be consistent. I don't know if it'll be 3 days a week. We'll have to see about that. I don't know how long those episodes will be. There'll be variety, because the way, not only the video podcast, that you can go on for 20 some odd minutes, but you can also do different types of content. There's long form content, like what I'm doing for this podcast, as well as, interviews and so forth. But there's also short form podcasts or short form content in the YouTube shorts. And so I want to take advantage of that. We've been doing that with Beyond Jaws podcast, and we've had a couple of shorts that have hit quite well. They drive people to look at your channel, and YouTube is using shorts to be able to really do something. So that's the future of the platform, is to have long form and short form content to be able to build on each other. And so that will be interesting. The short form content is really a minute long at this point. I don't know if it'll go any longer, but at this point it's a minute long. So that's really hard for me to put something in a minute, but I'll be trying. And I'll be doing what I can. So you'll see some more stuff out of there. I'll pop a link of the YouTube channel into this podcast, or into the show notes for here. If you want to subscribe, that would be great. If you want to share it with other people, or just watch and let me know what you think, I would love to hear your feedback. Now, speaking of shorts and short form related content, other platforms I'm going to be exploring, which it'll be less produced, probably more raw. We'll be talking on TikTok and on Instagram. It seems that I've been consuming a lot over the last year, and of both of these platforms, and to be able to do something like that as well as YouTube Shorts, I might be able to repurpose some of that content. But the idea is to kind of come up with content that's just in the now, and be able to discuss content on TikTok and on Instagram to be able to get my information, again, reach a different audience. It's not necessarily, a lot of people will go on multiple platforms to bring them back to one platform. That's not my goal for TikTok and Instagram. The goal for TikTok and Instagram is to build a presence on those platforms, and as a reputation of saying, hey, I'm here to provide you with Ocean News reactions and things like that. So that's sort of what I'm going to be doing for there. And so that's sort of, those are my plans for 2023. You know, those are lofty goals, but the goal is to just kind of continue my reach on these different platforms. You know, get more video experience and get more video traffic, to be able to put that forward, because that's, you know, as much as I love the audio audience, and I'm still going to be putting in a lot of work for the audio audience, video has become such a big role, is playing such a big role in growing channels and growing podcasts and growing content, that having both is a huge advantage for me. And the fact that I can build that, like, I can't make the one thing that I've always hesitated about video is I'm not in the field. You know, I rarely am in the field, if at all. I have a full-time job that's not related to marine conservation. That pays the bills. This is what I love. This is my passion. And so I want to be able to put stuff out that will be able to fill that passion, but also help other people, you know, be able to feed off of not only my passion, but also the information that I give, to be able to say, hey, I can actually do this, or I can work with this, or this is really good information. I want to be that resource for people. So from a video perspective, long form, short form, it doesn't matter. From an audio perspective, that's what I want to be able to do. I have the ability to do that. I have the time to do that in a way. But it's just, I'm not a great video editor. And so I'm going to be putting up stuff that will be a little bit more raw, and hopefully people like it. Hopefully you like it if you are a viewer for YouTube. The last thing I'm going to say, the thing that really got me onto YouTube, a friend of mine, I've talked about this before, a friend of mine said that he got YouTube Premium. And what YouTube Premium is it allows you can get videos without ads. That was the big thing, and he used it for music. So he got not only YouTube Premium for video, but he also got it for audio, so like for music. So he got YouTube Music for in his package, and his monthly fee. But what he said, what he liked about it is the fact that he could listen to something, or he could listen, or he could listen to anything without having to watch it. So he can keep his phone locked. So if there were a couple at the time, there were a couple of podcasts that I watched on YouTube because I really enjoyed them. Mostly they were football podcasts for the NFL. They were former football players, but I really enjoyed them. And so the audio podcast wasn't that great. So I want to listen more to the video podcast, but I didn't want to have to watch it all the time because it was just people sitting there. When you have YouTube Premium, you can lock your phone and you can still listen to the audio of that video. Made a huge difference in how I consume YouTube content right now. And so I'll pick a lot of video podcasts, and because I don't necessarily have to watch what's going on in the video, I will actually just, lock my phone and just walk the dogs, or, I will drive somewhere and I can listen to that podcast. So that was a big thing for me to start consuming YouTube content. And I continue to do that. And that gave me the idea to be like, hey, you know what? This podcast should be on video format as well. Not to do anything crazy at the beginning, just to kind of get the information out there. And hopefully that will work with the, a combination with the YouTube shorts and all that kind of stuff. So those are my plans. Changing a little bit of the audio podcast, not a lot about this, this podcast, introducing video podcasting to the content creation workflow. And so having a YouTube channel, also putting more stuff on Instagram and TikTok. So all these are at Speak Up for Blue for now. And you'll be able to see that. I'll put some links into the different platforms so you'll be able to see. But, if those of you who know me through Instagram and have been DMing me, you can DM me on all those platforms. I would love to hear from you. It's at Speak Up for Blue. But that's it for today's episode. That's it for today's episode. That's something that maybe I might have to change the Instagram account to How to Protect the Ocean, but we'll have to see if that's even available or be able to do that. But I'll let you know in the next podcast and how that goes on. There'll be new cover art. You're probably already seeing it right now, but there'll be new cover art, and it might change throughout the year. The process might change throughout the year. Who knows? But I'm going to be, fumbling through and trying my best to basically stay consistent and execute. So you're going to see a lot of creation from me. So I'm looking forward to that. That's it for today's episode on How to Protect the Ocean. I really love to hear your feedback at Speak Up for Blue on Instagram or at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram. We'll see if we can change that. I'll let you know. But thank you so much for listening to this episode of How to Protect the Ocean. I'm your host, Angelo, and have a great day. We'll talk to you next time. And of course, as always, happy conservation.